If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join our Discord channel to chat with us throughout the live show today. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite and become part of our community. At least that's normally the case. For a couple episodes here, including this one, Sean, our production guy, is on vacation, so these will be pre-recorded. All right, for this interview, Tucker Callaway joins us to talk about telemetry data's role in cybersecurity. Tucker is the CEO of Mezmo. He has over 20 years of experience in enterprise software with an emphasis on developer and DevOps tools. He joined Mezmo as Chief Revenue Officer, I assume. That particular CRO? There's several CROs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the type of CRO I was. Yeah.
In 2020 and stepped up to the CEO role 6 months later. Welcome to the show, Tucker.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And as usual in these intros, I try and lay a little foundation and understand where we're coming from. And we've got this term telemetry data. So I'm thinking maybe we can start there. And you know, security folks, I think for a while now have had a lot of data, access to a lot of data. Like that is one of the things that we solved. We asked for data, we wanted data, we got data.
You got it.
We got enough data that it turned into the next problem, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You know, so much data, you know, our SOCs, our analysts couldn't have almost no hope of getting through it all. So now the new problem is, you know, how do we make sure we see the data that's important in a timely manner, right? So when we say telemetry data, you know, help me understand what kind of data we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think at its core, it's effectively, you know, data that's generated by systems or machines, right? So there's been this massive explosion of digitization and cloud migrations and all that over the last 5 to 10 years, or depending on how long you want to argue it's been happening for, but for a while. And it's been accelerating over the last couple of years for sure. But all those kind of tech-enabled services, they're all made up of components, and those components generate their own data, whether it's servers or applications or microservices or other components that you consume. They're all emitting data just constantly behind the scenes. And we call that telemetry data. And embedded in telemetry data is all kinds of data that's extremely important to the security professionals.
Gotcha. Yeah, and do you see? So, and this isn't even just security that would be interested in this, right? You know, if the application breaks or somebody calls in, they're having trouble with the application. A lot of the same data would be necessary to look at, right?
Yeah, that's actually where we got our start as a company. We really started from the more of the observability category, if you will. But then we recognized quickly that the data was fueling both cybersecurity as well as observability. And I think there's some future opportunities for it to fuel some AI strategies too. But for the here and now, it's the same data that's being consumed to solve both observability as well as cybersecurity problems. And one of the challenges we see is that data is being replicated across all the tools, all the end user tools that exist in an enterprise today. And so you have this like kind of machine data or telemetry data tax that's happening because every tool has to replicate all that data.
Yeah, so help me understand what Mezmo, where you fit into this process here. You know, say for a security team that's already maybe storing everything in Splunk, and they've got some Splunk dashboards they're probably not happy with. They're probably not happy with what they're paying for Splunk. You know, where do you fit into that? Where do you help the typical security team with their data problems?
We help with both those problems. the primary one, and usually the opening problem, is the cost problem, right? Because one of the challenges people have with Splunk, it's very rich in its capabilities, but enterprises are constantly forced with this decision of what do I store, right? And if you make the decision to store it in Splunk, you're making a very expensive decision. So then, of course, you have to make, business decisions on what you're going to store, and you end up not storing some things. And that can be fine until you need that data, and then you've got a big problem on your hands that you didn't store that. If you're trying to look back 90 days and try to check all your DNS logs to see what your kind of what your risk or exposure was in a particular event, if you haven't stored all those logs, then you don't have the visibility, and you can't answer the questions of what is my exposure, what is my risk, or do I have any at all? And so everyone's constantly making these decisions. And one of the things that we solve for is help you not have to make that decision. So a really very simple but a classic example would be the ability to forward the most highest quality, most useful data to Splunk, so that you get the most out of all the rich capabilities and features that Splunk offers, but then storing a big portion of that data maybe in an S3 bucket or something like that. So it's there and it's available, but you don't have to pay the high cost of storing that in Splunk. And so making those decisions and dynamically making those decisions as context changes in the environment is a really important capability that we add to an enterprise.
So the storage location is relegated to a commodity. It becomes kind of decoupled and less important. So
yeah, we think a lot about how to get the right data to the right storage facilities at the right time, right? So there may be a point in time where that data now needs to be brought into Splunk, and we can rehydrate that data into Splunk, but only when you need it. So you're incurring the cost. We're optimizing your Splunk really by only incurring the cost when you need it. Now, there's also certain operations that we can perform in terms of alerts or notifications while the data is in motion. And there's two interesting things there. One is that gives the opportunity to not have to store the data because you are effectively alerting on that data in real time while it's in motion. And the other is the ability to combine sources or to kind of compose data, transform data as it comes through, so that you have a higher quality, richer set of data that actually gets stored. So you can both alert on it, but also make it richer and higher quality, so that when it gets stored, it's more useful. It's kind of cleaned and formatted and has all the right attributes on it that you would like.
Yeah, and speaking of which, I spent a lot of time building and running SIEMs and trying to capture this data and make sense of the kind of data that we're talking about here. And certainly one of the challenges there was understanding that data. And, with some of the original SIEM tools out there, you had to build a parser for anything, or you couldn't do anything with data. And Splunk was the big disruptor there. Providing something where you didn't have to write a parser for every event type, everything that would come through in that particular stream of data. So, a lot of the telemetry data you're talking about, probably coming out of in-house apps, right? Stuff, logs that
those are especially challenging. Right. Yeah.
So that always, that was always on the list of goals, was to get that kind of data in there and correlated with other, maybe more standardized data. Maybe I want my Active Directory data synced with this application data, so I can see who's doing what. Because one of the challenges was anytime we saw anything happen on a database, a query, anything like that, it was coming from the application user, right? Not from the end user, and tying all that together was very difficult. So, is that something that you can help with as well? Do you still have to build parsers in this case with your tool?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of layers to that topic. In fact, to take it back, we originally had created a really strong log management solution that where we excelled was application data. And I think that's that kind of dynamic that exists between application data and getting security insights out of it is particularly challenging, because of course the security engineers aren't the people who are making the changes to the application data, right? Those are just two different departments in any company. And so even if you get your arms around it once, the next release, every release has the potential to disrupt your understanding, right? And then as people move to more CI/CD, which is, as you mentioned on the onset, was one of my backgrounds, or a big part of my background, that CI/CD process, which is enabling a lot of business things, is undermining a lot of risk management things like security postures and things like that. As soon as that data starts to change, your ability to understand it and watch it, and everything changes too. So we actually see this problem as a data engineering problem, not necessarily as an observability or a cybersecurity problem. And so the kind of one of our foundational premises is that we believe telemetry data is unique and different than your traditional business data. And our strategy is to handle the unique challenges of that telemetry data, apply data engineering best practices to it, but have it be consumable by, in the workflows of the security engineer or the DevOps engineer or the SRE. So it's really taking data engineering concepts and applying it to a different set of users for a different type of data. And so with that, then the ability to profile that data and understand the changes in that data and baseline it, do drift detection, and just kind of data change management around it becomes a core asset of our offering, right? It's helping people manage that process. So there's do I understand my data? Do I understand the schema and the taxonomy of my data? Am I getting a lot of duplicate data that I'm storing and profiling and understanding that, and then understanding the changes as they go? Those are all problems that we solve.
Gotcha. Yeah. So some of what you do, just looking at your website and some of the diagrams there reminds me a little bit of Fluent D. Is that a fair comparison?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a good comparison there. Fluent D is typically more like an agent type based pipeline. So we've combined all that together into we've got basically three offerings. We have an edge capability, which is a lot more like a Fluent D. We've got a SaaS pipeline that combines all these data streams from all the different edge devices together. And then we've got analysis capabilities that allow you to store the data as well. We look at that on short time slice windows, like, depending on, like it's like real time / near real time. Typically that's done on a day basis or maybe a 5-day basis. And we maintain a buffer there so you can quickly reprocess data for events that have like a tight proximity to real time. So we have much more kind of more complete offering further back in the data flow, if you will, than like a Fluent Bit or a Fluent D. But yeah.
Okay. Sean, you had some questions, I think.
Absolutely. So Tucker, what I'm trying to figure out here, and thank you for walking us through the description of what you do. My question is around the most common telemetry data sources you use or work with, or improve as they work through this pipeline. And is this cloud primarily, or does this also include, say, endpoint type telemetry that might come from something like a Sysmon or EDR or event logs or things like that?
Yeah, I mean the system's open and flexible, and so yeah, we do all those types of data. I don't know, it'd be interesting to look at on a like, if you were to break it down, I'd say probably the majority of the data is from more standard Palo Alto firewall networks, Kubernetes data, but it's a lot of standard stuff. Where we spend the majority of our time, though, is not on the standard things. It's like the time spent and the value added, I would say, is much more around the application data. Like that's a big strength of ours coming from our background. So I don't know the answer on the raw percentages, but I can tell you from a percent of time spent, it's probably more like 60 to 70% spent on the application data, because that's the less structured, less dependable, needs more parsers, more capabilities to be better understood and better managed compared to the rest of the data, even though the other data probably outstrips that by volume.
Okay. So from the perspective of the application data, what are some use cases where you found a problem or a challenge that a customer's had and you were able to provide some value using your solution with that? And then what are some of the more challenging ones that maybe haven't been solved yet that are still out there and being worked?
Yeah, there's probably two sides to it. One is just on the sheer reduction and routing of data when it comes to that application data. It's, what do I need to store? What do I not need to store? So, for example, I may care a lot. I may not want debug logs from my application data in a standard. So we think of it in three categories. We think of there's an understanding phase, there's an optimization phase, and there's a respond phase in terms of like this life cycle of data management. And in the optimization phase, you often say, hey, I'm in a steady state and I don't have an interest in my debug logs. but I might really care when I see error logs, for example. And so I'm gonna filter out or suppress all the debug logs. But then if an event happens, let's say there's a performance issue or some kind of security breach, you might actually care deeply all of a sudden about those debug logs, but you might care less about the error logs because you know you have errors. So you got this massive avalanche of error data coming through. And when we think about responding, we think about, well, maybe the context has changed and what is needed from the data changes. And so now I'm going to turn off all of my error logs because I know I'm having errors, and I'm going to turn on all my debug logs. So I want the more depth of the ability to troubleshoot or see what's happening within the systems. So that would be like an example of like trying to get the right data at the right time. That's kind of like managing the data volume. The other area we think a lot about is the insights you gather from the data. So buried in telemetry data is a tremendous amount of insight data that you could get that might inform business decisions and things like that. So one of our favorite problems we've solved out there is one of our customers has people checking in for airline tickets at a kiosk. And so the ability to actually get that kiosk transaction information directly from the source gives you insights into what's actually happening. Where I think, interesting future opportunities is really going to be around combining and correlating data across streams. That's somewhere we thought the industry would go faster. We have a lot of the capabilities to do that, but I think some of the challenges are so great in this space that we've been focused more on some of these simple problems. To be honest, I would have thought they were solved for already. But in many cases, they're not. And so, solving for that kind of more complex advanced correlation takes like a number of streams of data and does a lookup for an enrichment from another stream of data and puts all that context together in real time. Like, I think that's a super interesting future opportunity, but we need to get through some of the basic things first.
So from an integrations point of view, what do your current integrations look like? Because obviously, as you mentioned, it's important to bring in different perspectives, and you're hinting a little bit at the asset management space.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about some of the integrations, some of the other types of data you have, what the correlation piece looks like.
Yeah. So there's hundreds, as you would imagine. It's one of the challenges is of course managing all these integration touch points. There's a couple techniques we take there. One is we integrate to a lot of the standard places of integration. So like a Fluent Bid, Fluent D would be a place that we would integrate, or Syslog, or hotel collectors, or like all the kind of standards. A really long list of like kind of standard integrations you would have, and then facilitating the custom integrations, which are more the application integrations. The correlations today are relatively straightforward. The correlations today are really more about how do I take a user ID and look up, turn that into how do I take things that are machine readable and turn them into human readable formats so that they're actually valuable to a SOC, for example. Other correlations are things like I want to take a big giant log file with a bunch of information. I just want to turn it into a metric, right? I don't need to store this entire log file, right? I might need to store it, but I don't need to store it in Splunk. I can store it into a cheaper storage facility. I can turn this into a single data point. We'll correlate things over time windows, like look at the existence of something over, let's say, a 8-hour window. How many times does it occur? And we can keep that counter going and keep the data refreshed on that, which keeps you from, having to store all those log files and kind of crunch that data at the source. There's a number of of correlations kind of down that route. Another big one too. I probably should have mentioned one of the comments earlier. Is just there's some very simple things that need to happen to this data in terms of PCI compliance or PI compliance and things like that. And so we can apply governance at the collection source so that that anything you're collecting has a governance or kind of a security policy posture applied to it. so that you know that anything that is going through our system has necessarily been screened with governance policies, and that all the data is safe to be moved around the organization as needed.
And do you do any sort of prioritization on that? Because it's a lot of any organization, even a small organization, would be dealing with a lot of data.
The prioritization in terms of the delivery, not so much. We do have the guarantee of delivery. Like we've of course architected to guarantee the delivery of systems. That's an interesting topic we've thought about, is like, can I prioritize one set of data over another? That's not something we're doing today. But we do prioritization in terms of what's downstream destinations get what data, right? So in a way, if you think about it, ensuring that the highest quality data goes to the highest quality destinations is absolutely business logic that we would implement. That's a form of prioritization. It might not be exactly what you meant, but it is definitely a form of prioritization. Like, I'm going to ensure that anything that is like critical from a SIEM event standpoint is going to get to Splunk right away. But if I'm just looking at like the full fidelity logs or the ROD logs that need to be stored for compliance purposes, I'm going to go put that into a more affordable storage facility, which might have lower performance in terms of being able to retrieve the data, right? You might want to have things that are like real time in your Datadog or in your Splunk instance, but you can have things that maybe you can take a little bit more time. Like compliance use cases are typically not, they're important, but they're not typically urgent, right? So you have time to go get that data. Other things you don't have time to go get, you need it instantaneously. And so from applying logic to the data, we're effectively prioritizing the access to that data by getting it to the right location.
So from a market perspective, when your team is going out to market, when you're talking to new people, mm-hmm. where are they placing you in their tech stack, and what are some of the challenges? Because we have a lot of desire right now to consolidate tools, and it sounds like you might have some of this capability, as an orchestration engine of sorts. But where are you getting the most traction? With which groups? You mentioned a few of them at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think that's a little bit immature out there right now, because we do see a pretty good variety. In some cases, it's a security team. In some cases, it's a platform engineering or an SRE team that might have purview over the security flow of the security data. So we are seeing quite a bit of diversity into where that shows up. I think that's driven though by the macro trend that we believe will happen, is that these enterprises need to get control over their telemetry data, and they don't have control over it today. And so it's a very early and innovative space right now. So we see a lot of movement there. What I mean by control though is, and I think this was the first part of your question, like, where do we sit in the stack? Today, the way that most solutions have evolved is there's some form of collection. There's some sort of transport, we call pipeline, transport of that data, the transport and ingestion. There's a data store, and then there's analysis. And you can kind of take that general form and apply it to most of the security tools and most of the observability tools. And that's where I see some really interesting opportunities when people start to say, I want to own and control my data, is the rise of the data lake, right? The rise of the data lake, I think, is an incredibly interesting opportunity. And I believe, my hypothesis would be that in the future, people will increasingly buy solutions that allow them to own their data, not advocate the ownership and the storage of that data to a vendor. And then they can take analysis capabilities and put it on top of their data lakes, which creates an interesting strategic control point for people who want to own their data in an enterprise, which is, what is the pipeline of data sending it to those locations? Does that make sense?
Would you qualify yourself or classify yourself as more of, maybe a data management tool? Would you consider yourself more of a log management tool? Where would you put yourself if you were doing the, hype cycle or wave?
Yeah. Data management. Yeah. No, it's actually something we struggled with early on. I would say that we started as a company coming from the log management space, mostly focused on the observability side of log management. Our strength was our pipeline. We saw the opportunity there. we started to go take that, look at that more as an enterprise asset that people need, not as a internal tool to do log management, but as a strategic tool for our customer to consume for their own benefit. And in that process, as we got into that, we started this journey probably about a year and a half ago, was when we first kind of set off on this kind of telemetry pipeline mission. I very quickly realized that we're not an observability tool. We can do observability things, and we're not a security tool, although we can do security things. We are absolutely a data management tool. And that goes back to I have like these three principles I like to repeat, because it's good to repeat three things. Is that, we're handling the problems of telemetry data, we're applying data engineering best practices, and we're tailoring it to the workflow of the platform engineer or the SRE, or people who want to work in like a DevOps type of way. Right. And that's because one of the questions I get, well, how are you different than a general purpose data pipeline? Well, if you probably looked at my website and their website, you wouldn't necessarily see a ton of differences. We do things like profiling and data management and all those things, but this data is different. It behaves differently. It acts differently. The signal to noise is different. And so applying data engineering capabilities to it takes on a different form. And then the workflow of the users as they try to control and own this telemetry data is different than your general data engineer, right? It's a different role, and they work in a different way in form and function.
And when you're going out to market, again, what kinds of customers? Are there specific types of industries that seem more hungry for this data management or pipeline and telemetry management more than others? Is it really big companies? Is it across the board?
So our original belief was that this problem was going to present itself primarily in large enterprises. And it certainly does. It certainly does present itself there. Most problems do present themselves there. I mean, these companies have done amazing things, and along with doing amazing things, you create complexity along the way. And so, good for them. And so we suspected it would primarily show up in those large enterprises. What we've come to find out is that problem presents itself almost in the exact same form in a small company. So, for example, was a big revelation for us is Mezmo is a really great target for Mezmo, right? So we have, on a percentage of spend, especially younger tech companies are spending so much money on these tools, but they're spending so much money on the underlying data created by these tools because they're cloud native and they're cloud first. And we take these strategies to combine composite services to create applications and services for our customers faster. And so I find myself thinking about data problems of our own when I think about our internal cost. And so it wouldn't be uncommon for us to find someone who's a sub 100 million in revenue tech company, not unlike ourselves, who's got $1 million Datadog bill, right? And that's just like on a percentage basis. That's not an appropriate spend for the value that people get out of it. And that's primarily driven by the fact they have to store all this data just in case. It's like almost like a risk management versus a value offering. And so our ability to solve that even for smaller companies has presented itself very quickly. And we've been really pleasantly surprised by it. Sad for the companies, but pleasantly surprised for us. And we're excited to go help them.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, just trying to understand, like who your typical users are of this application. Like, I've as my co-hosts have been asking questions, I've been working my way through your website and looking at screenshots and things like that, and very interested in like the recipes and looking at the the pipelines you've been describing. Especially pipeline as code. Like I can start to understand and think about all the cool stuff you could do with this if you had people who had time to nerd out on it and like do all these things, right? So do you typically see customers who are very successful with your products? Do they have dedicated data engineers who are doing this, or is it mostly people who are wearing multiple hats, like DevOps engineers that are also using this to solve problems that they would otherwise have to write code for?
That it's the latter. It's not data engineers. It's not to say that data engineers are never involved or don't have an opinion, but the majority of the users that are trying to solve these problems are really the owners of the destination tools at this point. I think that will continue to evolve, but it's the owners of those destination tools. And that's one of the reasons why the pipeline as code is so important, right? Because you take like an SRE or a platform engineer, or even probably most of the security engineers, they are, especially those that are doing like DevSecOps or SecOps, they are used to work. They have so many responsibilities on them today. And if we can't present ourselves in a way that we operate in their native workflows, then we are another tool that they have to use and learn, right? It's another interface, another querying, another all those things. And so as a result, like we made a big investment in our integrations with Terraform so that those people that are provisioning services, working in that DevOps way, they can, as part of their CI/CD pipeline, which is different, of course, than the telemetry pipeline, but as part of that, they can define these things as code. They can version them. They can roll them back. They could make incremental changes. They could look for dependencies and all those things on it. And so giving them the opportunity to actually manage this capability in a native workflow, we find is a much more approachable lift for them versus saying, hey, you have to go learn this new tool, this new UI. But a lot of people start in the UI, of course, as they're getting oriented with the concepts. But as they get mature, they'll start to mature that into more of a pipeline as code, or then they'll start to create recipes that was really a way that they enforce policy in many ways, and they can version those recipes and all those things. So,
and this is you mentioned recipes. I assume there are like pre-built recipes in there. There's like a library.
Yeah. We released this product in May, actually. So we're pretty early in our journey right now, just so we're on the same page there. But yeah, the recipes are most of them today are being created by customers, and then we're gonna increasingly expose those. It's actually going to be a big initiative for us in the coming months, is to go put those highly valuable recipes, make sure that we test them and properly abstract them, and then make them available to a broader set of customers, so they can just, like, it's actually the next step of data profiling. They profile the data. We have an understanding of it. We'll have a recommendation engine that then recommends which recipes to apply to this particular type of data, and then also make suggestions so that you don't have to decide on your own that you need to make this because you've got some cost problem. But we're suggesting constantly recipes to apply, and then giving you the ability to simulate the impact and the effect of those recipes, and you can see your cost reduction in a simulated fashion, or the output of that data in a simulated fashion, and you feel that have the confidence and the trust to go apply them. Because it's funny, the optimization phase is a very nerve-wracking phase for people. Everyone wants to optimize it, but then when you make that decision to optimize, you're like, what if I miss something? What if I over-optimize? And so actually managing for that optimization process and the ability to recover from it is actually a really important part. Like we thought everyone wanted to talk about optimization. That's actually not the hard part. It's actually relatively commodity type capability. You can do it with Flow-Bit and Flow-D, and you can do it stuff like that. What they don't give you is the ability to understand what is the data, to make recommendations on how to optimize the data, and then how to respond, again, on that kind of third pillar of ours. How do I respond when the context changes, or maybe I just over-optimized? I want to reprocess the data I just optimized.
Well, I love that you mentioned that, because I often talk about, I feel like one of our biggest problems in security is we're terrified of leaving anything out. We have this hoarding problem, but then we don't see the alerts, the data that we need to see, because we didn't get rid of anything. We decided to keep everything, and try to look at everything.
That was I think in early days, a surprising, maybe an underestimated problem of like the anxiety around optimizing. We hear everyone upset about their Splunk bill, or we hear everyone upset about their cost of all this data, and then we provide easy options for them to do it, and their resistance to taking those recommendations was a fascinating thing to learn. But when you put yourself in the customer's position and you're scared about losing this visibility, like, I get it. Like, I have a hard time making decisions sometimes too. So
Yeah,
accounting for that actually the human element of making the decision and the risk is actually really important. Like, it's an important thing.
we need some Marie Kondo like guidance. Does this
That's
log
right.
spark joy?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, that's great. So another thing I that occurred to me while looking at this, correlation is also one of the promises, many promises of SIMs that I feel like has never been successfully realized, and it looks like something that you can potentially do here. Maybe join up different sources, and again, I'm not 100% clear on how all this works, like how you're separating out all these different fields, like these logs are potentially in different formats. And maybe even the data you want to correlate on isn't in a standardized format in both logs. So is that a common use case? Are people commonly combining data from different log sources in some of these pipelines or with these recipes?
That I think Katie asked a question along those lines, or maybe it's a slightly different question, but my answer is substantially similar. In that, that's an area that we're really excited about. I think that shifting that our original premise was that our first step was to shift control, basically give people control over this data, and then once they had control, they'd be able to shift logic. And shifting logic is essentially shifting some, not all, but some correlation capabilities out of SIMs, out of observability tools, and putting it in a more central, more affordable location that's more real time to replicate a lot of the logic that happens at the destination today. We've found from an actual consumption standpoint that the control phase has got so many unmet problems and so much value to add that we've been really focused on the control phase. That control phase is what spread us out into what I talked about with understand and respond. Like, we thought, hey, you just get this, you get control over it. And then now the problem becomes the normalization and data mapping and data standardization and schema management, so I can do these correlations. But really, I think as an industry, we're at the phase of, we're still at that shift control phase and kind of putting the understanding and responsiveness around the optimization opportunity. And I'm really excited about that next step, which is how do we start to shift logic off these destinations into the data flow. And so the early stages of that we've had are things like we have like a rolling alert capability where you're doing more stateful alerts in the pipeline. So a lot of the stateful is being pushed off to these big heavy destinations, but there's a certain amount of stateful alerts you should be able to easily shift into this kind of more composite, more where all the data comes together. That's an opportunity to bring those together. But then you have to start to solve for things like data arrival rates and making sure you're having the right buffers and you have the right state and you're storing the right information. And so that's actually something we're working through with a customer right now that we're excited about.
Yeah, it's definitely, tools like this are, I'm very hopeful about, because, as I see, companies wanting to build custom chatbots, LLM-based chatbots internally, more than ever, we've got to understand the data that we have, and those chatbots won't just be for, like company financials and things like that, but also for telemetry data, for troubleshooting and things like that. I imagine.
I think so.
Teams.
Yeah. We're in the form of that. Sorry, I got excited. But the form of that takes the same form of everything we've talked about. Like, how do you get clean, normalized data into those LLMs? How do you keep it current? How do you reduce the noise so that they're more efficient and more effective, and you get better, higher fidelity answers to the questions you ask of these LLMs? And that it really is that is in many cases a data prep challenge, or at least that's a huge part of it, right? Is making sure that you have the right, you don't just dump a bunch of noise in there, but you normalize things, clean and prepped and make it really useful. But the form of that is no different. Like, it's exactly the same form of like what we'd be trying to do to make a Splunk more useful or more optimized, or a Datadog more useful or more optimized. And so I'm excited to have yet a third category we have the opportunity to disrupt, essentially by providing the same capabilities, which makes me really believe that while it's in the early stages of a market category today, like Gartner just started to cover telemetry pipelines is a thing. It just got added to the observability hype cycle, and all those things were really early. They have incredible projections about the adoption that they think we'll see in the enterprise over the next 3 to 5 years. But like those things combined with all the disruption or value add we could provide to so many different categories is something that makes me incredibly excited.
Yeah, me too. I think that's all we've got today. Tucker, thank you so much for joining us. This was, wanted to have you on there because this was an area I didn't really understand, and I needed to have a chat with somebody to better understand, and really appreciate you coming on and explaining a lot of this stuff to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great questions. I appreciate that, Sean and Katie, and really great to talk to everyone.
Yeah, and stick around. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.